The conference room door closed in my face. Not slammed. Not pulled shut with force or drama. Just closed, with Diane's hand on the handle and her voice carrying through the narrowing gap. You dwell on the past, Shauna. We need forward-thinking energy in this review. She smiled as she said it, the kind of smile that's meant to look generous but lands like a dismissal wrapped in concern. I'm Shauna Davidson, 34 years old, and I've been with Infinity Technologies for 6 years. I've sat in that same conference room for every single post-process review since I joined the Quality Assurance Division. Until today. The hallway felt suddenly too bright, too exposed. Around me, other team members moved past with their laptops and coffee cups, eyes sliding away from mine with that particular brand of workplace discretion that says they saw what happened but won't acknowledge it. The silence wasn't just awkward. It was deliberate. I should have felt humiliated. I should have felt angry, or at least surprised. Instead, something inside me went very still and very clear, like a lock clicking into place. This wasn't about the meeting. This was about something much larger that I'd been watching build for months without naming it. I turned and walked back to my desk with measured steps, spine straight, face neutral. I didn't storm off. I didn't argue. I didn't give anyone the reaction they might have been waiting for. I simply removed myself from the equation. That's when I understood, I'd been watching myself disappear for a long time. At my desk, I opened my laptop and stared at the screen without seeing it. My hands rested on the keyboard, but I didn't type. The office hummed around me with its usual rhythm, phones ringing, the printer churning out reports, someone laughing near the break room. Everything normal. Everything exactly as it had been 10 minutes ago, except now I was on the outside of something I'd helped build. My phone buzzed. A text from Claudia, my closest friend in the company and someone who worked 2 floors down in operations. Are you okay? Heard what happened. News traveled fast here. Of course it did. Diane had made sure the exclusion was public enough to be noticed, soft enough to seem reasonable. I typed back, I'm fine. Processing. Another buzz, almost immediate, lunch? I'm coming to you. I didn't argue. Claudia had a way of showing up precisely when I needed her, even before I admitted I needed anyone. The morning dragged. I went through my emails, flagged priority items, responded to routine queries. I did my job exactly as I always had, with the same precision and attention to detail that had earned me 3 performance awards and a reputation as someone who caught problems before they became disasters. The irony wasn't lost on me, I was good at my job because I remembered what went wrong before. I documented failures so we wouldn't repeat them. That was literally my function. And now I was being told that made me backward-looking. By the time Claudia appeared at my desk at noon, I had worked myself into a state of controlled clarity. She took one look at my face and gestured toward the elevator. We didn't speak until we were outside, walking toward the small cafe 3 blocks from the office where the lighting was softer and the chance of running into colleagues was minimal. Claudia ordered for both of us while I found a corner booth. When she slid into the seat across from me, she set down 2 bowls of soup and a basket of bread, then fixed me with the kind of look that demands honesty. Tell me what happened, she said. All of it. So I did. I started with the closed door, with Diane's casual cruelty disguised as constructive feedback. Then I went backward, because that's what you do when you're trained to analyze systems and find root causes. I went back 6 months, to when Diane first arrived as our new division supervisor. She'd come from a competitor, brought in by upper management with promises of fresh perspectives and innovative process improvements. She was 42, confident, articulate, always immaculately dressed in ways that made everyone else's business casual look sloppy by comparison. She had a way of speaking that made her opinions sound like established facts, and she loved an audience. Her first week, she called an all-hands meeting to introduce herself. She talked about transformation, about leaving behind old ways of thinking, about embracing failure as a learning opportunity rather than something to be avoided. It all sounded progressive and exciting. Half the team was charmed immediately. I was cautiously optimistic. Change could be good. We'd been doing things the same way for years, and some processes definitely needed updating. But then she started making adjustments. Small things at first. She moved our weekly team meetings from Tuesday mornings to Friday afternoons, when everyone was mentally checked out and eager to leave. She introduced a new reporting structure that required us to submit daily summaries of our work, which took time away from actually doing the work. She brought in external consultants who asked us questions about our jobs, took notes, then disappeared without implementing any of their recommendations. When I pointed out that the Friday meetings resulted in lower participation and follow-through, she smiled and said, "We need to build discipline. If people can't stay focused on Fridays, that's a personal accountability issue." When I suggested that the daily summaries were redundant given our existing project management system, she said, "Documentation is never redundant. Unless you have something to hide?" The question mark at the end of that sentence was doing a lot of work. I started noticing a pattern. Whenever I raised a concern based on past experience or existing data, Diane would reframe it as resistance to change. She never said I was wrong, exactly. She just made my input sound outdated, overly cautious, stuck in the past. Other team members started parroting her language. "We need to be more agile. We can't let past failures hold us back. Sometimes you have to take risks." All true statements in isolation. All weaponized in context. Claudia listened to all of this without interrupting, her soup growing cold in front of her. When I finally stopped talking, she leaned back and exhaled slowly. "She's been isolating you," Claudia said. It wasn't a question. I blinked. "What?" "Think about it. She systematically discredited your expertise, made your contributions look like obstacles, and positioned herself as the innovative thinker while painting you as the person holding everyone back. Now she's excluding you from critical meetings. That's not management. That's calculated." I wanted to argue, but the pieces were clicking together too neatly. Diane had been in the room for every project that succeeded under her watch. She'd been conspicuously absent or quick to delegate when things went wrong. She took credit for improvements that came from the team and blamed setbacks on inherited problems from previous leadership. And she'd been slowly, methodically, pushing me to the margins. "Why me?" I asked. Claudia gave me a look that was equal parts frustration and affection. "Because you have institutional knowledge. You know where the bodies are buried, literally and figuratively. You remember what was tried before and why it didn't work. That makes you dangerous to someone who wants to present themselves as the sole source of good ideas." I felt something cold settle in my chest. She wants me to quit. Or she wants you discredited enough that when she does push you out, no one questions it. We sat in silence for a moment. Around us, the cafe buzzed with lunch conversation, people laughing over sandwiches, someone ordering an oat milk latte with extra foam. Normal life, continuing as normal lives do, while mine quietly rearranged itself. My phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen, an email notification from Diane. Subject line, process review follow-up. I opened it. The email was brief, professional, copied to the entire QA team. Following today's productive post-process review, we've identified several action items for implementation. Please see the attached document for assignments. Moving forward, all process documentation will flow through my approval before distribution. This will ensure consistency and alignment with our strategic vision. Attached was a spreadsheet. I scanned it quickly. Every single action item from the review was assigned to other team members. My name appeared nowhere. Except at the bottom, in a footnote, Shauna will focus on historical data archiving and legacy system documentation. I was being put in a corner. Given busy work. Made irrelevant. I showed the email to Claudia. She read it twice, her jaw tightening. "This is retaliation," she said flatly. "She excluded you from the meeting, and now she's excluding you from the actual work that matters. What do I do?" Claudia looked at me for a long moment, then reached across the table and took my hand. "Right now?" "Nothing. You document everything. You save every email, every meeting note, every assignment. You do the work she gives you better than it's ever been done. And you wait. Wait for what? For her to need you. Because she will. People like Diane don't actually know how to do the work. They just know how to manage the appearance of doing it. And when the wheels come off, she's going to look for someone to blame or someone to fix it. You make sure you're positioned as neither." It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was the answer I needed. Claudia had worked in enough dysfunctional corporate environments to recognize the patterns I was still learning to see. We finished lunch in a different kind of silence, the kind where strategies form without being spoken aloud. The next 3 days were strange. I came to work on time, did my assigned tasks with meticulous care, attended the meetings I was invited to, and kept my head down. I archived historical data. I documented legacy systems. I created reference materials that no one would probably ever read but that would be comprehensive and flawless. I didn't complain. I didn't push back. I didn't send passive-aggressive emails or make pointed comments in team chats. I just did my job. And I watched. On Tuesday, I noticed that the implementation team working on one of the action items from the review was struggling with a database migration. The issue they were hitting was one we'd encountered 2 years ago during a similar project. I had documentation on the workaround. I didn't volunteer it. I waited to see if anyone would ask. No one did. On Wednesday, I saw an email thread where the team was debating a process change that would create a bottleneck we'd already identified and solved 3 years prior. Again, I had the documentation. Again, I stayed silent. Claudia checked in daily. How are you holding up? I'm fine. Watching things unfold. She's going to crash eventually. You know that, right? I know. Thursday morning, the office had a different energy. I felt it the moment I stepped off the elevator. People were clustered in tight groups, voices lowered, eyes darting toward Diane's office where the door was closed and the blinds were drawn. I sat at my desk and opened my email. There, at the top of my inbox, was a meeting invitation sent at 6:30 that morning. Urgent, process failure debrief. All QA team members required. The meeting was in 30 minutes. I had a pretty good idea what had happened. The database migration had failed overnight. The system that was supposed to go live this morning was down. And based on the flurry of frantic messages in the team chat I wasn't officially part of but could still see, no one knew how to fix it. I made myself a coffee. I checked my documentation archive to confirm I had the files I thought I'd need. Then I walked to the conference room at exactly 9 o'clock. The team was already assembled, everyone looking exhausted and stressed. Diane stood at the head of the table, her usual composure frayed at the edges. Her jacket was slightly rumpled, her hair pulled back more severely than usual. When I entered, her eyes locked on me with something between relief and resentment. Shauna, she said, her voice tight. Good. You're here. I took a seat near the middle of the table, equidistant from Diane and the door. I folded my hands and waited. Diane launched into an explanation of the system failure. She used words like unforeseen complications and unexpected variables and unfortunate timing. She did not use words like ignored warnings or repeated mistakes or we didn't check the historical documentation. As she talked, I saw team members exchanging glances. A few people looked at their laptops, presumably pulling up logs and error messages, trying to diagnose the problem in real time. Finally, Diane stopped talking and looked around the table. Ideas? Solutions? We need the system back online by end of day or we're facing major contract penalties. Silence. Then Martin, one of the senior engineers, cleared his throat. We've seen this error code before. I think. Maybe 2 years ago? 3 years ago, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. Diane's expression was carefully neutral. You remember this specific issue? I documented it. We had the same migration failure during the Phoenix project rollout. The workaround is in the legacy files. The room went very still. And you have access to those files? Diane's voice was measured, but I could hear the edge underneath. I do. I've been archiving and organizing them all week. That was my assignment. Someone coughed. Someone else stifled what might have been a laugh. Diane's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Can you share that documentation with the team? Of course. I opened my laptop, pulled up the folder, and sent the relevant files to the team shared drive. The technical breakdown is in the first document. The step-by-step resolution protocol is in the second. Implementation time is approximately 4 hours if the team is familiar with the system architecture. Martin was already opening the files, his face relaxing as he scanned the contents. This is exactly what we need. This is perfect. Diane nodded slowly. Thank you, Shauna. That's very helpful. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just nodded back and closed my laptop. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, with Martin and his team mapping out the recovery plan based on the documentation I'd provided. Diane contributed very little, mostly nodding and asking questions that made it seem like she was actively problem-solving when really she was just following along. When the meeting ended, people filed out quickly, eager to get started on the fix. I was gathering my things when Diane approached me. "Shauna, can we talk?" "In my office?" I followed her down the hall. Her office was larger than most, with windows overlooking the city and a desk that was conspicuously clear of clutter. Everything in the space was carefully curated to project success and control. She closed the door and gestured for me to sit. I remained standing. "I want to acknowledge," she started, her tone conciliatory, "that we've had some communication issues lately. I think there's been a misunderstanding about your role and contributions." I waited. "You have valuable institutional knowledge," she continued. "I can see that now. Perhaps I was too focused on moving forward and didn't appreciate the importance of understanding where we've been." It was a nice speech. She'd probably rehearsed it on the way to the office. "I'd like you to rejoin the core team," she said. "Full participation in reviews, planning sessions, everything. I think we need your perspective." I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. "I appreciate that. But I want to be clear about something. My job is to prevent failures by learning from past mistakes. That's not dwelling on the past. That's due diligence. If my doing that job well is going to be framed as resistance or backward thinking, then we're going to keep having this conversation." Diane blinked, clearly not expecting pushback. "Of course. I understand. That was poor phrasing on my part." "Was it? Or was it an accurate reflection of how you view quality assurance work?" The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. "Shauna, I'm trying to extend an olive branch here." "I know. And I'm accepting it, with conditions. I'll rejoin the team. I'll participate fully. But my contributions don't get dismissed or minimized when they're inconvenient. Historical data is data. Past failures are learning opportunities. That's not optional perspective. That's the foundation of how we improve." Diane's smile had vanished entirely now. "I'm not sure I appreciate your tone. I'm not sure I appreciated being excluded from meetings that directly impact my work and then being called in when that exclusion created a crisis." We stared at each other for a long moment. I could see her recalculating, trying to decide if I was worth the political effort or if she should cut her losses and find another way to manage the situation. Finally, she nodded. "Fine. You've made your point. Let's move forward professionally." "Agreed." I left her office before she could add anything else. My hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline catching up with the confrontation, but my head was clear. Claudia was waiting by my desk when I got back, her face a mixture of concern and curiosity. "What happened?" "You were in there forever." I told her. All of it. The meeting, the documentation, Diane's offer, my conditions. Claudia's grin was fierce. "You did it. You didn't let her make you small." "She's going to retaliate," I said. "This isn't over." "Maybe. But you've established boundaries. And you've proven your value in a way that the whole team witnessed. That matters." She was right. The crisis this morning hadn't just been a technical failure. It had been a visible demonstration that institutional knowledge and historical documentation weren't luxuries. They were necessities. Over the next few weeks, things shifted. Diane was more careful in how she spoke about past projects. She included me in meetings again, though her warmth was performative rather than genuine. Other team members started coming to me directly with questions, bypassing the new reporting structure she'd implemented. I realized I'd been given something unexpected, clarity about my own value. For months, I'd let someone else's narrative define my contributions. I'd let doubt creep in, wondering if maybe I really was too focused on the past, too risk-averse, too slow to embrace change. But the system failure had proven something important. Knowing what went wrong before isn't dwelling. It's preparation. It's prevention. It's the difference between repeating failures and learning from them. And that realization changed how I showed up to work. I stopped apologizing for bringing up past projects. I stopped softening my language when I pointed out potential problems. I stopped trying to make my expertise palatable to someone who was threatened by it. I just did my job, and I did it well. Diane and I never became friends. We never even became comfortable colleagues. But we reached a kind of professional détente where she knew she couldn't dismiss me and I knew I wouldn't be intimidated into silence. The larger lesson, though, was about recognizing when someone is trying to make you doubt your own competence. Diane had been good at it, subtle and strategic. She'd used language that sounded reasonable, that made her seem forward-thinking and me seem stuck. She'd isolated me just enough that I started questioning whether I was the problem. But exclusion reveals intention. When someone closes a door in your face and tells you it's for your own good, pay attention. When someone dismisses your expertise as dwelling on the past, ask yourself what they're trying to hide or avoid. 3 months after the system failure, Diane announced she was leaving Infinity Technologies for a position at another company. Her departure was framed as a mutual decision, a natural next step in her career journey. But Claudia, who had connections in HR, told me the real story. Upper management had grown concerned about staff turnover in our division and had started asking questions about leadership effectiveness. Diane's replacement was someone promoted from within, someone who had worked alongside us for years and understood what the division actually needed. At her goodbye gathering, Diane gave a speech about growth and change and embracing new challenges. She thanked the team for their dedication and talked about all we'd accomplished together. She didn't mention the system failure. She didn't mention that she'd excluded key people from important decisions. She didn't mention that her leadership style had created problems rather than solving them. But I didn't need her to. The people who mattered knew the truth. I've thought a lot about that moment in the hallway, watching the conference room door close, feeling the click of recognition that I was being pushed out. It would have been easy to internalize that rejection, to believe the narrative Diane was constructing about me being an obstacle to progress. Instead, I let it clarify something essential: my worth wasn't determined by whether someone valued it. My expertise was real regardless of whether it was acknowledged. My contributions mattered whether or not they were celebrated. The door closed, but I didn't disappear behind it. I stepped back, I reassessed, and I positioned myself to be exactly where I needed to be when reality inevitably caught up with the performance. Now, when I walk past that conference room, I remember not the exclusion, but what came after. The steady work of documenting what matters. The clarity of knowing my own value. The quiet satisfaction of watching someone who tried to make me small have to acknowledge, publicly, that they needed what I knew. I don't dwell on the past. I learn from it. And there's a difference that matters more than Diane ever understood. The work continues. The division continues. And I continue, with my institutional knowledge intact, my boundaries clear, and my voice fully my own. What I didn't mention was what happened in the weeks immediately following that confrontation in Diane's office. The dynamic had shifted, but not cleanly. Nothing in corporate environments ever shifts cleanly. Diane began what I came to think of as her documentation campaign. Suddenly, every interaction between us was followed by an email summary. Every meeting I attended where she was present resulted in detailed notes sent to the entire team, with my contributions carefully reframed in her language. If I pointed out a potential risk based on historical precedent, her notes would read, Shauna raised concerns about repeating past approaches. Team discussed balancing caution with innovation. If I provided technical documentation that solved a problem, her summary would say, team leveraged archived resources to address current challenges. Collaborative problem-solving proved effective. She was building a narrative where she remained the central figure and I was a supporting character whose contributions only mattered when filtered through her interpretation. Claudia noticed it immediately. She's creating a paper trail, she said over coffee one morning. She's protecting herself in case you escalate anything or if leadership starts asking more questions. Should I be doing the same thing? You already are. Every email you've saved, every piece of documentation you've created, that's your trail. But yes, start being more explicit. When you contribute something significant, send your own summary. Copy the relevant people. Don't let her be the only one controlling the narrative. It felt exhausting, this constant vigilance, this need to document and protect every piece of work. But I understood the necessity. In corporate politics, perception becomes reality if you're not actively shaping it. So I started sending my own updates. brief, factual, stripped of editorial commentary. Provided Phoenix project documentation to resolve database migration failure. Estimated 4-hour recovery time based on previous resolution protocols. System restored by 2 p.m. No drama. No blame. Just facts. The shift was subtle but noticeable. Other team members started referencing my documentation directly in meetings. When problems arose, people would ask, "Did we encounter this before? Does Shauna have notes on it?" My name became associated not with resistance to change, but with institutional memory that prevented expensive mistakes. Diane couldn't openly object to this without revealing her earlier dismissiveness. She'd already had to publicly acknowledge the value of historical documentation. To push back now would contradict her own stated position. But I could see the calculation in her eyes during meetings. She was measuring the political cost of my presence against the practical value of my expertise. And she was losing that calculation. The turning point came about 6 weeks after the system failure. We were in a planning meeting for a major client presentation. The potential contract was worth millions, and the pitch required us to demonstrate our quality assurance processes and failure prevention protocols. Diane was leading the preparation, naturally. She'd created a presentation that was heavy on aspirational language and light on concrete examples. "We need to show them we're forward-thinking," she said, clicking through slides filled with buzzwords and generic process diagrams. "We don't want to bog them down in technical details or dwell on past problems." I waited until she finished her run-through. Then I raised my hand slightly, a gesture of polite interruption rather than challenge. "Can I suggest something?" Diane's smile was tight. "Of course. Clients this size don't just want to hear about our philosophy. They want evidence that we can prevent the specific types of failures that cost them money. What if we included a case study section showing a problem we identified before it became critical, how we addressed it, and what the outcome was?" That seems like it might be too detailed for an initial pitch. With respect, I think it's exactly what they're looking for. They're coming to us because their current vendor missed a critical failure that cost them significant downtime. They want to know we won't do the same thing. Martin, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. "Shauna's right. I've sat in on pitches like this before. Technical teams want to see technical competence, not just strategic vision." Others around the table nodded. I saw Diane recalculate in real time. "What kind of case study did you have in mind?" she asked. "I can pull together 3 examples from the last 2 years. Each one shows early identification of potential failures, the intervention protocol we used, and the quantified impact. It'll take me a day to compile it properly, but it would strengthen the technical credibility of the pitch significantly." Diane looked around the table, reading the room. Everyone was waiting for her response, and the team's body language made it clear they thought the addition was a good idea. "Fine," she said. "But keep it concise. No more than 5 slides total." Agreed. I spent the next day building the case study section. I chose examples carefully, problems we'd caught early, solutions we'd implemented efficiently, outcomes we could quantify in terms of cost savings and downtime prevention. Each example was meticulously documented with data, timelines, and results. When I presented the draft to Diane the following morning, I watched her read through it with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. The case studies were strong, stronger than anything else in her presentation. And they were undeniably my work. "This is good," she said finally, the words seeming to cost her something. "Very thorough. Thank you. I'll integrate these into the main deck." "I can do that if you'd like. I know the flow of the examples." Another pause. Another calculation. "Fine. Send me the updated version by end of day." The client presentation happened a week later. I wasn't originally scheduled to attend, but Martin specifically requested my presence in case technical questions arose. Diane couldn't refuse without it looking suspicious. The presentation went well. The strategic vision slides received polite attention, but when we got to the case studies, the energy in the room changed. The client's technical lead started asking detailed questions, digging into our methodologies, our documentation practices, our quality control processes. I answered most of those questions. Not because I was trying to overshadow Diane, but because I had the technical knowledge to address them accurately and completely. At one point, the client's lead said, "This is exactly the kind of rigor we need." We've been burned by vendors who promised innovation but couldn't execute. You clearly have systems in place to prevent that. Diane smiled and nodded, taking credit for our team's comprehensive approach. But when the meeting ended and we were packing up, the client's lead approached me directly. You put together those case studies, didn't you? I did, yes. Impressive work. That's what sold us on your team, he said. I thanked him, professional and neutral, but I felt the shift, the validation of being seen by someone outside our internal politics. We won the contract. 2 days later, Diane took a bow in the all-hands for exceptional presentation and strategic positioning. My name appeared once, buried in a list of contributors. I expected nothing else. Others noticed anyway. She's taking credit for your work, Claudia said. That's the hierarchy, I replied. But I'm keeping track. Quietly, I started exploring options, not to flee, but to remember I had choices. Updating my resume was clarifying. Without Diane's framing, my work looked solid. Impressive. I reached out to former colleagues, met recruiters, attended conferences. At one of them, a director from another Infinity division made an offer. He was building a quality oversight team, reporting directly to the VP. He wanted someone with institutional knowledge and technical depth. He didn't need a crisis to see my value. The role was a step up. More visibility. Real authority. A chance to be foundational instead of managed. I accepted. Diane was gracious in the way people are when they're losing leverage. I promised thorough documentation and clean handoffs. Professionalism observed, relationship concluded. The new role delivered. Within months, error rates dropped 40%. Leadership noticed. My work started surfacing in rooms I'd never been invited to before. I heard Diane's team struggled after I left. Turnover. Missed standards. No satisfaction, just confirmation. Here's what I learned: sometimes the fight isn't worth winning. Sometimes the smartest move is leaving a system that won't change and choosing one that already values you. The door closed. I found a better one. That mattered more than vindication ever could.